This is a GCSE biology presentation looking at the effects of exercise. What you've got in front of you is a little task to get started. You've got aerobic respiration, anaerobic respiration in animal cells and in bacteria, and anaerobic respiration in plant cells and yeast, and on the left hand side a number of questions relating to each of those different processes. If you are not familiar with anaerobic and aerobic respiration, I'd recommend you go and watch those presentations now. If you're happy enough, you think you're okay, go through the table, fill in your answers, and when you're ready, you can restart the presentation and check how you've done. So pause the presentation now. In terms of the different types of respiration, well, only aerobic is oxygen used. In terms of glucose, all types, both aerobic and anaerobic respiration, require glucose. In terms of production, in aerobic respiration, carbon dioxide and water are produced. In anaerobic respiration in animal cells and bacteria, glucose is converted into lactic acid, but anaerobic respiration in some plants and in yeast means that we produce ethanol and carbon dioxide. In terms of how much energy is released, you just need to be able to say that there's a lot of energy released or a small amount of energy released. In aerobic, there's a lot of energy released, where in any type of anaerobic, there's a little amount of energy released. And lastly, you need to know where these different types of respiration occur. Well, aerobic occurs in the mitochondria and anaerobic occurs in the cytoplasm. In this particular lesson, we're going to look at substances that are needed for respiration. We're going to define the term oxygen debt, and we're going to describe what happens to lactic acid that gets produced in anaerobic respiration in animals. First off, when we exercise, we require energy. The muscles require that energy for it to actually contract. Well, that energy comes from respiration. Respiration only occurs if there are certain substances present. The substances that are needed for aerobic and anaerobic respiration are glucose. For aerobic respiration, we also need oxygen, but at a minimum, both types of respiration need glucose. Therefore, as our muscles contract more and we do more exercise, more energy is required, which means we have to have more respiration occurring, which means we need more glucose and possibly oxygen being sent to the muscle cells. So we've said about the fact that muscles, when they are doing exercise and contracting, they need more glucose and they need more oxygen if it's aerobic. If it's anaerobic, they still need glucose, but they don't need more oxygen. What happens to your body? What changes when you start to do excessive heavy exercise? When you start running for a long period of time, when you start swimming for long periods of time, what changes occur in your body? There are three changes, and if you look on the right hand side, there are pictures to help you indicate which specific organs we're going to talk about. But trying to think of three changes that occur in terms of those organs. Pause now, have a little think, come up with your best answers and restart when you're ready. The organs on the right hand side are the lungs and the heart. And the three changes that occur are the rate of breathing increases when we do exercise. The volume, how deep we are breathing, increases with exercise. And the heart rate, how fast the heart is beating per minute, also increases with exercise. And the reason those things happen is because when we're breathing faster and we're breathing deeper, we're increasing the rate of gas exchange. We're increasing how quickly oxygen can get into the red blood cells in our blood. In terms of the heart rate, increasing the heart rate pumps that blood around the body faster, so the oxygen in the red blood cells gets to the cells at the muscles much quicker. Remember, we need glucose and we need oxygen for aerobic respiration. When we get them to the muscles as quickly as possible, we maximize the rate of aerobic respiration. We've mentioned before anaerobic respiration. An anaerobic respiration can occur for two main reasons inside an animal. Firstly, anaerobic respiration can very quickly produce energy. So if you think of athletes doing a 100-meter sprint, athletes doing a 100-meter sprint generally will do anaerobic respiration from start to finish. Because the aerobic respiration pathway is so long, it takes too long for the energy to be released in that way for them to use it. The other reason anaerobic respiration would occur is whenever you get to the point where you're breathing as fast as you can, you're breathing as deep as you can, and your heart's pumping as fast as it can, you just cannot get oxygen to the cells in the muscles any faster, which means anaerobic respiration will occur is a method of releasing some extra energy. Remember, when we talk about anaerobic respiration, we talk about incomplete oxidation. We talk about the production of lactic acid. Now, lactic acid is removed from our body after the excessive exercise is done, but it requires oxygen to do so. And the oxygen, the volume of oxygen that is needed to remove that lactic acid from the body after we've done our exercise is known as an oxygen debt. Now, this section is important to note. This little section only applies to anyone doing the higher exam on AQA. If you were doing a foundation paper, you do not need to know this little section. If you're doing a different exam board, please check with whoever your teacher is to make sure if it applies or not. But for an AQA student, this only applies if you're doing higher. And we basically talk about what happens to the lactic acid. Well, the lactic acid gets pumped to the liver, and at the liver, that extra oxygen, that oxygen debt, the oxygen and lactic acid react together and they can form glucose. Now, when we get that glucose, we can then continue to break it down in the same way we do aerobic respiration and results in carbon dioxide and water. Or, if the glucose isn't necessary, it will then be turned into glycogen and stored in the liver. Remember, the word oxygen debt refers to the volume of oxygen that's needed by the liver to get that lactic acid broken down back into glucose and then eventually into glycogen or carbon dioxide and water. At this point, we are back on to if you're doing foundation or higher with AQA, this is something that all students need to know for the exam. So this part is for everybody, not just higher only, it's for everyone. We have this thing called muscle fatigue. Muscle fatigue occurs whenever muscles have been put through a certain amount of exercise and they start to become ineffective. They start to contract a little less efficiently. They don't quite work as well as they normally should. Now, traditionally, muscle fatigue was always linked to the buildup of lactic acid, and the statement was that lactic acid causes muscle fatigue. That's not the case. Lactic acid does not cause muscle fatigue. Muscle fatigue occurs with long periods of vigorous exercise. It means that the muscles can't contract effectively, and it is actually linked to the loss of glycogen. Remember, glycogen is what happens to glucose when it gets stored in the liver of animals. If you're doing lots of exercise, you need lots of glucose, so that glycogen is often turned back into glucose for respiration. As the loss of glycogen increases, we can end up with muscle fatigue. Just to finish off, a little activity. You may have seen this from some of the other presentations, but what you've got to do is you've got to get your subject knowledge to the point where you can talk continuously for 2 minutes without stopping, no pauses, no mistakes, no repetitions. And you've got to talk about everything in this lesson. Now you can talk to a family member, a pet, a mirror, yourself, wherever you want to talk to is not important. The fact is you got to be able to talk about it for 2 minutes and you got to make sure you're right.